Hello everybody, I'm Paul Ducklin from Sophos Naked Security, back for another week's Naked Security live talk. This week, as you can see, we have a somewhat quizzical talk entitled When is a Bug Bounty Not a Bug Bounty? And I'm going to try and avoid using any jargon. I'm going to try and explain, firstly, what I mean by that title, and secondly, why it's important and what it means in the context of people who consider themselves bug hunters, who aren't really, and who aren't doing the cybersecurity ecosystem any favours. So I hope to have a little bit of a sort of public order sermon mixed in with all of this. So why this topic this week? Well, the reason is that my very good friend and colleague from Sophos, he works in Vancouver. Like me, he's another researcher, principal research scientist at Sophos called Chester Wisniewski, and he published this week an article that you may have seen, and it's on our sister site, news.sophos.com, if you want to go and look for it. And you can see there the title is have a domain name, beg bounty hunters may be coming your way. And so Chester's made, that's what passes in Canada, folks, for a pun. Instead of bug bounties, he's calling them beg bounties, and we'll see why. And by the way, if you want some more background to that, we have a related article on naked security. Same sort of thing. Beware of technical experts basically blackmailing you with bug reports or bombarding you. I've said the word blackmailing here. Some of these reports that you will see that masquerade as bug bounties, these days they do sail very close to the wind of blackmail or extortion, and they're never going to work, and they're not the right way to behave, and we'll talk about that in a bit of detail. So let's start by looking at what we mean by a bug bounty program. And many companies have those. Sophos has one. Many others, not just cybersecurity companies, but software vendors, website operators and so forth. I hope I can get the text to appear there, the right contrast. There you go, that's what ours looks like. If you go to sophos.com, just search for responsible disclosure or disclosure policy. You'll find it easily enough. The Sophos responsible disclosure policy. Now, if you find a bug or a problem with one of our products or on our website and you want to tell us, it seems a little bit weird that maybe there's all this legalese and there's loads of stuff that you need to read through. The idea of bug disclosure programs and responsible disclosure programs like this, they become quite normal across the industry. The purpose is that it kind of creates a somewhat formalized framework within which companies like ours, like other companies that make software, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Twitter, companies like that, are saying, look, if you find a bug and you choose to go digging into our software or our web services, even though you're not employed by us, we're kind of okay with that, but we expect you to play by some rules that we expect the ecosystem to understand. And the idea of those rules is that by formalizing this a little bit, it means that there's some kind of, if you like, legalistic permission for people who want to go bug hunting independently, objectively, maybe from the comfort of their own bedroom. You know, the guys who would be hackers in the old days, they can go after looking for bugs in a controlled way that benefits everybody. And loosely speaking, the idea of this is that you should do your best to discover the bug without breaking things for everyone else. So if you go to our website, you find there's a way that, if I've worked out that if I were to click this button, I could crash the whole thing. Then you don't have to click the button to crash the whole thing and spoil things for everyone else in order to prove your point. You can simply disclose it to us. And the other thing is that you're expected to be doing this with us and with any other company that has a bug bounty program. You're expected to be doing it with the intention that you will responsibly disclose this. In other words, you will give the vendor, you will give the website operator a fair chance to fix the problem, negotiating with you along the way before you actually say anything about it to anyone else. So there's no suggestion that anything's going to be swept under the carpet. The idea is simply that your motivation that should be that for the greater good of all, you actually want to improve cybersecurity by helping someone fix a genuine problem without just showing how clever you are to the world by deliberately using that problem to provoke some hassle for everybody or disclosing customer data that you don't need to do, all that kind of stuff. And of course, the idea of that is by having a framework, and in many companies, Sophos does this, other companies do this as well, is that a lot of companies these days don't run those bug bounty programs by themselves. They use, if you like, a third-party company. The big names there are companies like Bugcrowd, that's the one that Sophos uses, and HackerOne. I think you're allowed to call it Hackeroni. It's just too good a name to avoid. And the idea is that these companies, by acting as a kind of objective broker, it solves the problem that did exist a few years ago, where bug bounty hunters who felt they ought to be paid for doing all this work to find the bug would disclose them to a company and say, hey, I found this. What do you think it's worth? And the company would go, oh, thanks for telling us. And that was the last a person would hear. And so there was this reaction of the idea of no more free bugs. So a lot of companies like ours, we use a third party, if you like, bug bounty broker. They deal with all the legalisms. They deal with keeping track of everything. They deal with making sure that you really have found a problem, that it really is working within the guidelines that we've set, and all of that stuff. And the idea is that it provides a fair way for someone independent to look at your software, to look at your website and see what they can find. Now, most companies, ours included, do this kind of, if you like, penetration testing, code review, bug hunting, all this kind of stuff. Most companies do this themselves, but there's something quite appealing about having someone outside, objective and independent who has no preconceptions, if you like, no real knowledge about exactly the culture in which the code was developed. They're going to find things new inevitably. And the idea is that's for the greater good of all. So that's what we mean by a bug bounty. Unfortunately, as you'll read in Chester's article, there's a, if you like, a parallel movement, perhaps of people who don't have the significant skills that a good bug bounty hunter needs. Some of these guys, you read of people, wow, this chap earned $100,000 for finding this, what sounds like a trivial bug. And, they found out that if you put this bit in there and then you press that button and then you turn around 3 times and you wait till the moon is full, the software will crash. Now, they may have put 9 months of working 12 hours a day into uncovering a whole series of little issues that lead to that final problem. So you can imagine that having that information for a company that writes software or creates a website, that actually having that whole string of things that person did well documented and repeatedly described so they can be scientifically and reliably fixed. You can imagine that's why big bug bounties get the big money, because sometimes a bug bounty hunter could get lucky, admittedly. They could get a lot of money for just finding something that nobody else had looked. That's just the good fortune side of it. On the other hand, that person who spent 9 months coming up with a bug bounty that's worth $100,000, they might have spent the 9 months before that trying to find a hole that they thought existed and they never actually got anywhere. So there could be an awful lot of wasted effort as well, in which they've actually discovered that there are large parts of this software or the website they're looking at that are secure, which is also information that they can disclose to the company they're working with. And that's what makes those things worthwhile. But as I said, there seems to be this sort of parallel community of people go, hey, you know what? This sounds like free money. And this is what Chester introduced under the name of beg bounties. Now, beg bounties, as he explains in his article, and we have a great podcast. We just published it today. Go to Naked Security, search for Naked Security Podcast on anywhere good podcasts are found. And we've got one on basically, how not to be a bug bounty hunter. And that's me inviting Chester to explain, the way to do it and the way not to do it. And the problem is that there are, if you like, I don't want to sound too rude here, but let's call these people hangers-on in the industry who figure I'm going to take money out of for nothing. So what they sort of do is they say, hi, I'm a researcher, because everyone can be a researcher if they want. You don't have to have a qualification or a degree or go to college. You can be a bug bounty hunter if you want. And so these are some of the examples that Chester put in, you'll see in this paper. So here's one. Here's a chap. Obviously English isn't his first language, but he's trying hard. And it says, I'm a web browser security researcher and found vulnerabilities. If you will pay me an appreciation award, then I can give you the vulnerabilities. Now, I understand where that person's coming from. Like I said, in the old days, it did happen that people would disclose vulnerabilities, and a lot of work, and maybe the exploit that proves that the vulnerabilities exist and are dangerous, they'd hand them over to companies that would say, oh, thanks, and then they would say, well, do I get a reward for that? And the company would just go quiet. So there was this idea of, how do you build this responsible program that helps both sides? So in the modern era, this kind of thing, it is so close. It's so close to blackmail, isn't it? It's so close to extortion. And why would you ever trust somebody who's going to come at you like that? And so Chester's paper goes into some other examples, and here's one example. It turns out this guy looks like some youngster who's just trying to grow a business, but he's not going about it in a very good way. So he came up with a slightly different approach. He said, I've found some vulnerabilities, and here's one. On your website, there's clickjacking. Now, clickjacking is an old problem. Most browsers prevent it really well these days. It's where you see something like an image and you think, oh, I'll click on that, but actually your click goes through the image and you're clicking some hidden thing like a like button or a dodgy link behind. And in order to give his bug report some kind of credibility, he's actually explained, hey, this is what clickjacking is. And so you can imagine if you're a small business and you've set up a website in a hurry because you had to because of coronavirus lockdown, maybe you needed a click and collect payment site, you needed to get online quickly. You might look at this and go, okay, that sounds like an issue. And if you go hunting and you go reading about clickjacking, you think, well, it's a real thing. And in fact, it is a real thing because the analysis that he's given of the problem here, he's basically copied it and pasted it from the free website run by OWASP, which are about web application security vulnerabilities. Basically, that's where you go to learn how to be a bug bounty hunter or how to secure your website. So basically, he's taken some technobabble and made it so that somebody who looks at that might go, you know what? Maybe I should actually engage with this guy. Maybe I should negotiate. Now, Chester was able to contact this guy, and it sounds like, loosely speaking, he is on the level. He does know something about penetration testing. He wasn't trying to say, well, I'm going to keep all these things secret and then you pay me the money and then I'll tell you. Really, he was just using this as a kind of sales or a marketing gimmick. Not a very good idea. It's not going to, if you are looking to get into bug bounty hunting, this is not the way to win friends and influence people. So the issue of beg bounties versus bug bounties is that if you want to get into bug bounty hunting, which is a great way to work from home. It's a great way to work on your own time. It's a great way to work without having to, get a job with a big corporate but you still have to work within the guidelines that are set. And those guidelines are the responsible disclosure policies that I mentioned earlier. They are there for a very good reason. They're there to protect the bug bounty hunters. So if they disclose something, particularly if it's through a third party, they can prove that they knew about that and that according to your guidelines, there was probably some financial value in it for them. So it stops companies just running off with the work because they have to, hey, tell me how it works and then I'll think about paying you. So it stops it working that way around. But the other thing about responsible disclosure guidelines, you'll find it in ours, is that there are often some very strict limits. In particular, there are things that companies say that you're not allowed to do. In other words, you can't actually pretend you're a cyber crook. So, for example, if you wanted to break into someone's website, you could actually, if you really wanted, you could go and work out who their web administrator was and kidnap them and hold them at gunpoint and say, log me in and do this or else. Now, a criminal might do that, but that would be utterly unacceptable, immoral, illegal for somebody to do for research purposes, and of course it's off the agenda. Now that's an extreme example, but there are actually similar things that if you're like an uncontrolled bug bounty hunter, there are things that you could do that would really prove your point, that would be very dramatic, and the part of the world that was impressionable will go, wow, you're super clever. The problem is that there are things where you have to know that here is a line you must not cross. So in other words, if you have found out a way that you might be able to disclose data for arbitrary customers whose data is stored on a website, then it's enough to be able to show how that bug works and to disclose it in a responsible way that may of necessity have caused you inadvertently to recover data for, say, 1 or 2 people. It is not necessary to go and download 100 million records into a giant database, compress it up, and then send it to the company to frighten them or to impress them or to prove how clever you are. Because what you've then done is you've committed a giant data breach, and nothing you say can ever convince anybody otherwise. You got the data, you didn't need to do it, it wasn't necessary for you to prove your point, you've gone too far, and things like that generally are excluded in responsible disclosure guidelines. And if you like, the bug bounty hunting community has I would say it has become essentially self-policing, in that people inside the ecosystem know the sort of ways that they could behave that actually let them work independently, but also help companies like ours improve things for everybody else in ways that, to be honest, companies might not ever find out if they just look themselves, because sometimes having a fresh pair of eyes on the problem really helps a lot. So I hope this hasn't sounded too much like a sermon, folks, but what I want to advise is that if you are thinking of getting into bug bounty hunting, then don't do it in the way that what Chester calls beg bounty hunts. People, hey, here's a begging letter. I know something, send me money and I'll tell you what it is. Don't do that, because you're not going to win friends or influence anybody. You're just going to get into trouble. The flip side of that, if you are a business who's confronted by stuff like this, don't be tempted to engage with the person because you think, well, maybe they know a little bit, they haven't let me too much. I'll talk to them a bit and then maybe I'll turn to someone I trust. The thing is, if you do that, whoever you're contacting is just going to put the hard sales squeeze on you, and it's going to be uncomfortable at best, and it might not end very well. So if you find somebody you trust, whether that's a security partner, an IT partner that you've already worked with. If you're a Sophos customer, talk to your Sophos partner. They may offer penetration testing or security services for you. They may also suggest that you invest in things like Sophos Managed Threat Response or the Sophos Rapid Response Services. They're not penetration testing or bug hunting services. They're just there to make sure that if someone says, oh, there does look to be a problem in your network, that those guys can go in and they can investigate and see whether anybody has ever used that problem to your disadvantage by looking for ways that it might have been exploited or abused inside your network. So it's a sort of like a way of doing security preparedness. So those are the two sides of the coin. Don't do this kind of beg bounty hunting. You're not going to impress anyone. But if you do receive these beg bounty reports that really if it feels like blackmail, then assume that it is and go and find somebody you trust. The flip side of the flip side, and I'll just mention this because it is important, a commenter on the article we published on naked security, the one with that brown bug that I showed you, a commenter said, you know what, I'm not really a bug bounty hunter. I've never asked for money or even acknowledgement, but on many occasions in the past, I've simply contacted website operators using their recognized contact address to say, hey, there seems to be malware on your site because when I visit it, there are obviously some modified scripts. Or to say, oh, by the way, I went to a login page and this one, you haven't secured it properly. It has HTTP, it needs HTTPS. All I'm doing is simply telling them that I spotted something that's already visible to everybody on the way in. And I said, generally, I've had over time one of 3 different responses. One is basically, thanks. And because they're not asking for money, the person goes away and fixes and they think, great. So a third of the time, a job well done by both sides. The second response that he says he very often gets is, so what? Or nothing, just click. No response, nobody seems to care. So what on earth is he supposed, so he kind of has to leave it. There's a site with malware on, he's trying to tell someone and they just don't want to listen. Don't be that company. And even worse, he said the third response that he's had is that you say something quite simple like, I went to your site and there's JavaScript on there that contains malware. Some crook must have put it on your website. You might want to do something about it. There's no threat, explicit or implicit, in that. And of course, the response that sometimes comes back from companies that maybe seek out their lawyers before they seek out their IT techies is, we're going to sue you. In other words, you better not tell anyone about, how dare you contact us. And don't be that company either. If somebody is trying to bring something to your attention that could improve cybersecurity for everyone, don't put them off reporting it by scaring them witless, because word will get around and nobody will tell you this stuff again if you make them afraid to do so. So thanks very much for listening, folks. I hope you've got a better idea of what bug bounty programs are for, but most importantly, when bug bounty submissions really aren't. So don't submit them in the way that I showed you there. Don't do anything that's saying, hey, pay me money and I'll tell you something. It's just not a pleasant way to hunt for business, even if you're fundamentally honest. And if you get one of those, don't panic and don't engage with the person who's trying to pressurize you. Go and find someone local that you know and trust who can look out for problems for you in a much more believable way. So thanks for listening, everybody, and until next... Thanks for listening, everybody, and until next week, stay secure.